My name is Margaret Lane, and I am 63 years old. For most of my life, I believed in working quietly, saving diligently, and trusting family even when they didn't always deserve it. I married my husband, Richard Lane, when I was 29. He was kind then, full of ambition, and I thought our life would be simple and predictable. I never imagined that in my 60s, I would be forced to protect everything I'd built from the very people who claimed to love me. I worked as a forensic bookkeeper for more than 30 years. Numbers made sense to me. People didn't always. When I retired at 61, I thought I had earned peace. Our mortgage was paid off, our debts minimal, and I had a comfortable nest egg tucked away in a brokerage account I had managed myself. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough to let me breathe. Around that time, my father-in-law, Franklin Lane, began talking more frequently about his failing health and the possibility of moving into assisted living. He was 85 then, a stoic man who had spent most of his life working as a machinist. He had a modest pension and social security, but not much else. I felt sympathy for him. He had never been wealthy, but he had always been proud. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that my husband and his sister Diane had been having private conversations for months. Conversations about Franklin's end-of-life care. Conversations about financial responsibility. Conversations about my retirement savings, which they apparently viewed as a conveniently accessible solution to a problem they hadn't prepared for. I began sensing tension during family dinners. Whispered exchanges between Richard and Diane. Sudden silence when I entered a room. Polite smiles stretched too tight. And Franklin's anxious glances at me during dessert, as if he wanted to tell me something but lacked the courage. It was a sense more than anything, something tightening beneath the surface of our ordinary life. A faint, distant rumbling before the ground gives way. I didn't understand it yet. I only knew that these people I lived with, these people I trusted, were circling around a conversation I hadn't been invited into. And then, one evening in early April, I caught a fragment of a sentence from the hallway outside the study. Diane's voice, low and urgent. "We need access to her accounts before it's too late." I froze. Not because I fully understood what she meant, but because I suddenly realized I had been right to sense something. The numbers weren't adding up. My instincts, the same instincts that had served me through decades of financial audits, told me that something was terribly wrong. I walked back to the kitchen, heart steady but mind racing. I had no proof and no clarity, only a whisper and a feeling. But I'd spent my life following the trail when something felt off. I didn't confront them then. I simply waited and listened. I didn't know it yet, but this quiet moment was the first step toward uncovering a betrayal that would shake the foundation of my marriage. And before it was over, I would learn that the people closest to me had plans, very detailed plans, about how to spend my life savings. I just hadn't given them permission. And by the time they discovered what I had done, it would be far too late. The truth revealed itself not in a dramatic burst, but through a series of small, unsettling discoveries that pieced together like shards of broken glass. The first was a misdirected email. I was sitting in the living room, sorting through recipes I wanted to try that week, when my phone buzzed. The subject line read, "Projected retirement budget, using Margaret's funds." At first I assumed it was spam. But the sender made my breath stop. It was from Diane. I opened the attachment, expecting some mistake. Instead, what I saw chilled me. It was a full retirement plan, detailed, meticulous, and shockingly presumptuous. It included projected assisted living costs for Franklin, medical expenses, care aids, home modifications, and even leisure allowances. At the bottom, in bold font, was the note, "Primary funding source, Margaret's retirement portfolio." They had even listed the exact amount in my brokerage account. To the dollar. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a slow, controlled fury. It wasn't the expenses that shocked me. I understood Franklin's needs. What devastated me was the utter lack of respect. They had planned out my entire financial future without even speaking to me. They had taken my life's work and turned it into a spreadsheet that wrote me out of my own story. That evening, I waited until Richard came home. I watched him carefully as he kicked off his shoes, poured himself a drink, and settled into the armchair. I could tell something was weighing on him. His movements were sluggish, his silence heavy. So I asked a simple question. "Richard, is there anything you want to tell me about our finances?" He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He simply said, "No." A lie delivered so casually it felt rehearsed. Later that night, I opened his laptop while he showered. We shared everything, passwords included, and I had no intention of invading privacy. But I needed answers. And what I found stopped my breath. There were email threads between him and Diane stretching back nearly a year. They'd been discussing how Margaret won't mind, how she has more than enough, and how it's her turn to contribute to the family. Her turn. As if my decades of work had benefited no one but me. As if I were a vault they could raid. The worst part wasn't the planning. It was the tone. Cold. Entitled. Strategic. They weren't asking for my help. They were orchestrating my compliance. In one email Diane wrote, "If she hesitates, we'll say it's temporary. Once we get the transfer, it'll be too much hassle for her to undo it." Temporary. I felt something inside me harden. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. Resolve. I closed the laptop and breathed slowly, letting the betrayal settle like sediment at the bottom of a glass. They had crossed a boundary they couldn't uncross. If they wanted to take my money, they'd have to find it first. And soon, they would discover that the woman they underestimated had a lifetime of experience spotting financial deception. The shock had come. And now the story would turn in a new direction. To understand why this betrayal struck so deeply, you have to know where I came from. Money was never easy in my childhood. My mother worked nights at a textile mill, and my father died when I was 13. I learned early that survival depended on discipline. Count every dollar, stretch every meal, save every scrap of opportunity. When I married Richard, I didn't expect wealth. He worked steady jobs, sometimes long hours, but he had never been good with finances. I accepted that and managed our household budget. It wasn't an issue. Some couples split chores, ours just happened to be financial. Diane, however, had always resented me for it. She saw my practicality as coldness, my organization as control. She made snide remarks over the years. "Margaret always has to run the numbers, or some people don't have the luxury of spreadsheets." She lived impulsively, going through marriages like seasonal shoes and spending money before it had the chance to settle. I never judged her, but she certainly judged me. Franklin, my father-in-law, had always been kind to me. Quiet, hard-working, and immensely proud. He never asked for help. If he'd come to me directly, I would have given what I could with an open heart. But he didn't. Because Diane had convinced him that I was too protective of my funds, and wouldn't understand. They weaponized his insecurity and my diligence. And that turned what could have been a compassionate conversation into a full-scale deception. Growing up poor shapes you. It teaches you that money is not just numbers. It is safety, dignity, the ability to breathe without fear. So when I discovered that they planned to dismantle the security I'd spent a lifetime building, it wasn't about greed. It was about survival. They didn't see me as a partner. They saw me as an account balance. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. But instead of collapsing under the weight of betrayal, I felt myself sharpen. The same instincts that kept me afloat as a child, that guided me through a career in financial forensics, now stirred with purpose. If they were going to weaponize money against me, then I would use my greatest strength, clarity. I needed to understand every angle. Their motives, their timeline, their expectations. Only then could I decide how to protect myself, not through anger or retaliation, but through truth. I spent the next several days replaying their emails in my mind. I remembered every past argument where Diane accused me of being rigid. Every time Richard told me not to stress about money. Every time they dismissed my caution as paranoia. In hindsight, those were early cracks in the foundation. Small warnings. Foreshadowing I hadn't recognized. Now I did. And once I understood the past, I could finally step into the next stage. This wasn't a fight. It was an audit. And I knew exactly how to conduct one. I began quietly. You never reveal your suspicion before you understand the full picture. That's something years of forensic work had drilled into me. You watch from a distance until the numbers speak. The first step was confirming access. My brokerage account had strict security, and I knew I hadn't shared the password. But when I logged in, I saw something that made my chest tighten. A failed login attempt from 2 nights prior. It wasn't from my devices. Someone had tried to get in. They were testing the gate before making their move. Next, I reviewed our joint accounts. Nothing was missing yet. That was good. They were planning, not acting. But I needed to know how far they were willing to go. So I called the brokerage and asked if anyone had inquired about the account on my behalf. The representative hesitated for a moment before saying, "Yes, ma'am, someone identifying himself as your spouse asked about account consolidation options last week." I thanked her. My voice never wavered, but my pulse quickened. Consolidation was a tactic. They were trying to transfer my assets into a joint account, something easier for them to access. Now I knew the plan. And I also knew the timeline. They intended to act soon. So I began my own preparations. I opened a notebook, ordinary on the outside, meticulous on the inside. I dated each discovery, logged each failed login, recorded each email screenshot. I printed copies, stored them in 3 locations, and saved encrypted duplicates on a USB drive I kept in my coat pocket. I documented everything, not for revenge, but for truth. Then I started observing behaviors. Richard became oddly attentive, asking questions about my schedule, offering to help with bills, suggesting we meet with a financial advisor. Diane called more frequently, her tone sugary, asking about future planning. Franklin avoided my eyes entirely, guilt weighing down his usually steady expression. Piece by piece, their desperation became visible. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I simply absorbed, calculated, and prepared. And the more I learned, the clearer it became that their plan relied on one assumption, that I would remain passive. They assumed wrong. A week later, after gathering everything I needed, I took the first real step. One small, quiet, decisive move. I transferred the entirety of my retirement savings, every last dollar, into a secure offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Legally, transparently, and fully under my control. It wasn't secrecy I needed. It was distance. A firewall between me and their intentions. The transfer completed in 48 hours. The account was now inaccessible from U.S. institutions. Any attempt to tamper with it would trigger alerts only I could disable. The timing was perfect. Because the very next day, Richard approached me with a strained smile and said he wanted to discuss an important family matter. The confrontation was coming. I knew it. They knew it. But they had no idea the battlefield had already shifted beneath their feet. And I was ready. They staged the conversation like an intervention. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I walked into the dining room and saw Richard, Diane, and Franklin seated side by side. Their faces were solemn, their posture stiff. On the table in front of them was a neat stack of papers, documents they assumed would persuade me. "Margaret," Richard began, "we need to talk about my father's future." I nodded calmly. "I'm listening." Diane slid the papers toward me. Her expression rehearsed sympathy, poorly masking her anticipation. "We've put together a plan. Dad needs care, and we all have to contribute. You're in the best position to help." I leafed through the papers. It was the exact retirement budget from the email, printed, hole-punched, and organized into a binder. They had spent hours preparing this presentation, unaware that I had already read everything weeks earlier. Richard leaned forward. We know this might sound overwhelming, but we've spoken with a financial advisor, and he said the best route is to consolidate your accounts into a shared family fund. That way we can manage Dad's needs together. I kept my face still. Neutral. Intelligent. A shared fund? Using my retirement savings. Diane nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. You have more than enough, and Dad doesn't. We'll make sure you're taken care of later. That line. We'll make sure you're taken care of later. As if I were a dependent. As if I should be grateful. Have you already contacted my brokerage? I asked softly. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Just to explore options. We were trying to help. Their language. Help. Share. Contribute. Thin paper covering blatant entitlement. I closed the binder slowly. And what, exactly, gave you the impression that my life savings were available for this? Diane's mask cracked first. Oh, Margaret, don't be dramatic. You don't have children. You don't have major expenses. What else would you use it for? There it was. The truth stripped of politeness. Richard added, we assumed you'd want to support the family. My father, our future, depends on it. Our future. Not mine. I looked at Franklin. His eyes were wet, anxious. Did you know about this? He swallowed hard. They told me you wouldn't help unless it was structured. I didn't want to burden you. I exhaled slowly. Franklin, you are not the burden here. Diane bristled. Then what is? The secrecy, I said. The assumption. The planning behind my back. Richard tried to soften his voice. We only wanted to protect Dad. No, I said evenly. You wanted to protect yourselves. You wanted control of money that doesn't belong to you. Silence. Heavy. Charged. Then I delivered the final revelation. And in case you're wondering, the account you were planning to consolidate is no longer accessible to any of you. I moved it. Richard blinked. Moved. To where? A secure location, I said. One you can't reach. Diane's face twisted. You moved your money? Without telling us. I allowed myself the smallest, coldest smile. Yes. Much like you planned to move my money without telling me. Their shock was instant. Pulseless. A silence so profound it felt like the house itself had stopped breathing. The truth was out now. And we were no longer a family in conversation. We were parties on opposite sides of an ethical breach. And only one of us had receipts. The confrontation did not escalate with shouting. I don't believe in shouting. It escalated with clarity. Richard stood abruptly, pacing the room like a man cornered by his own actions. Margaret, this isn't fair. You blindsided us. Blindsided you? I asked quietly. After you planned to liquidate my assets without permission? Diane pushed her chair back hard. We weren't going to liquidate anything. We were going to reallocate it for a better purpose. Better, I repeated, letting the words settle. For whom? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I reached into my bag and placed a stack of printed emails onto the table. Their emails. The ones they thought would stay hidden. I didn't need theatrics. The truth did the work for me. I have every message, I said. Every login attempt. Every note to the advisor. Every plan you made without me. Richard's face drained of color. You went through my email? No, I said. You sent your plans to an advisor who forwarded documents to our shared home network. Carelessness is not the same as privacy. Diane scoffed. You're twisting everything. No, I replied. I'm laying it out plainly. You made decisions about my life, my finances, and my future without including me. And then you expected gratitude. Richard's voice trembled. We thought we were doing the right thing. You thought I wouldn't notice, I corrected. You thought I would quietly comply. Franklin finally spoke, voice thin and unsure. I didn't want this, Margaret. I didn't want them to pressure you. I know, I said gently. He was not my enemy. He was a man caught in the middle of his children's entitlement. But that didn't absolve the others. I straightened my shoulders. Here's how this will go. I will contribute to your father's care, on my terms, with transparency, and with boundaries. Not through manipulation. Not through deception. And definitely not by surrendering control of my finances. Diane snapped. You're being unreasonable. No, I said. I'm being ethical. Something you should learn. Richard stepped forward, voice frayed. Margaret, don't do this. Don't turn this into a war. This isn't a war, I replied calmly. This is accountability. Silence again. But this time, it was theirs. I gathered my documents, stood, and looked each of them in the eye. You played with the wrong person, I said softly. Because I don't fight with revenge. I fight with facts. I walked out of the room. I didn't slam the door. I simply closed it behind me. The confrontation was over. Now came the consequences. And they would unfold whether they were ready or not. The fallout happened quickly. Richard's first reaction was panic. He followed me around the house for days, trying to justify, explain, backtrack. But explanations cannot undo betrayal. And I made it clear, trust is not rebuilt with excuses. Within a week, Franklin asked to speak with me privately. He apologized, not for needing help, but for letting his children use him as leverage. I believed him. He was a proud, decent man caught in the crossfire. I assured him I would support his care, ethically and directly, without involving Richard or Diane in financial decisions. He cried. I didn't. But I felt something soften in me. Diane, on the other hand, doubled down. She called repeatedly, leaving messages dripping with indignation. Accusing me of abandoning family. Calling me selfish. Insisting I had more than enough. Eventually, I blocked her number. Richard grew distant, weighed down by guilt but unwilling to confront it honestly. Our marriage, already strained, began to unravel. Not with shouting, but with silence. The kind of silence that reveals two people no longer standing on the same side. Eventually, I gave him a choice. Counseling or separation. He refused counseling. So I chose separation. I moved into a quiet cottage on the edge of town, closer to Franklin's assisted living facility. I visited him weekly. We played cards. Talked about the past. Sat in comfortable silence. He often thanked me for helping him maintain dignity without conflict. I never told him the full extent of what his children had tried to do. Some truths serve no one. Meanwhile, the advisor who had been contacted by Diane filed a report to his firm, concerned about attempted unauthorized account consolidation. It triggered a review. Richard and Diane were formally cautioned. Nothing criminal, but enough to put a permanent mark on their financial reputations. That wasn't my doing. It was the natural result of their actions. And my offshore account. Untouched. Secure. A symbol not of secrecy, but of independence earned through decades of hard work. The consequences unfolded like dominoes. Calmly. Inevitably. And when the dust settled, I found myself standing alone, but not lonely. The truth had cost me relationships, but it had given me something else. Self-respect. And that was worth every penny. Now, at 63, I look back on this chapter of my life with a surprising sense of peace. People often imagine revenge as fire, explosive, destructive, consuming. But real revenge, the ethical kind, is quieter. It is truth allowed to stand unshaken. It is boundaries drawn with calm hands. It is choosing dignity over drama. I didn't ruin anyone. I didn't expose them publicly. I didn't weaponize my knowledge. I simply revealed the truth and let the consequences follow their natural path. Richard and I finalized our separation amicably. Diane and I have no relationship now, and that is a loss I willingly accept. Franklin passed away peacefully a year later, with me holding his hand. In his final weeks, he thanked me for seeing him, not as a burden, but as a person deserving of care. I used a portion of my savings to establish a small fund for seniors in our community who lack family support. That was the kind of contribution I wanted to make. A choice, not an obligation. And as for the offshore account, it remains where it is, a reminder that protection is not selfishness. It is wisdom earned through experience. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: your boundaries are not acts of unkindness. Your caution is not paranoia. Your resources, emotional, financial, personal, belong first to you. And anyone who respects you will never try to claim them without your consent. Revenge, when done properly, is simply the restoration of truth. If you'd like to hear more stories of quiet strength, ethical justice, and hard-won peace, I invite you to stay and listen to the next one. What kind of story would you like me to tell next?